Nutrition is an $800 billion per year industry in the US, about $125 billion here in Canada. Companies like PepsiCo, Tyson, and Nestle stand atop the podium of food sales, snack foods, and factory farmed meat. All while culturally, a battleground of competing ideologies is placed in front of you constantly. But it's not about the food, it's about the attention. So the landscape and the claims and the focus will change as soon as it's not interesting anymore or driving sales. Remember paleo? This is what a Google search trend for paleo looks like since 2004, and keto, and Atkins. It's been culturally dead for a while now. And now here's carnivore and seed oils. They're having their moment in the sun, but once it's no longer profitable, and in our social media landscape, once it no longer drives controversy and attention, which brings money and sales and pumps the tires of the ego and the industry, they'll switch to something else. They'll start saying ridiculous things to stay relevant, like homemade watermelon sorbet is an animal-based food.
This is how to make watermelon sorbet with only 3 ingredients, and it's completely animal-based. Watermelon, honey, and lime.
So now, watermelon, lime, and let's not forget spaghetti squash.
And look at that, it's like animal-based spaghetti right there.
Are all animal-based. Now, I know all the Paul Saladino fanboys are going to comment saying, you don't know what an animal-based diet is because that's what they did on the spaghetti squash video. No, I understand that an animal-based diet is one comprised largely of animal foods and can include some plant foods. Just like a plant-based diet could be predominantly plant-based with some animal foods. What's particularly hilarious here is that he's calling the food themselves, whether it be spaghetti squash or watermelon, animal-based. He just so badly wants to hold on to that label after abandoning the carnivore diet because he believes it made him ill. That would be like me introducing small amounts of animal products into my plant-based diet, sitting down for a steak that was sliced out of the muscle tissue of a cow and calling it a plant-based steak. So a genuine question for the Paul Saladino defenders, would you consider that a plant-based steak even though it came from a cow? Comment yes or no down below. And if you answer no, well then you seem to get why this is so ridiculous.
Shout out to my fellow British Columbian, Dr. Matthew Nagra. From seed oils to anti-nutrients to carnivore to whatever's next, it can be exhausting. But here's the thing, when we recognize all of that for what it is, we can ignore it or see it as equally important as any other social media trend, be it a dance or a funny skit. Once we put our phone down or turn off the TV, we can try our best to just forget about it. And the good news is that when we take ourselves out of the toxic media space of flashy, quick-cut reels and TV segments with no nuance, and we just sit at our dining room tables or stand in our kitchens, take a deep breath, pause for a moment, we can come back to reality and consider, how does food and nutrition mingle with our well-being? Let's use this week's main story, as part of March being National Nutrition Month, to look at the little habits and lesser-known science of how we can foster a relationship with our nutrition that is positive and nourishes our health and overall well-being, and leave the fear-mongering tribal diet culture to the side for now. Let's focus on the basics. Let's focus on well-being. This is the Wellbeing Weekly Show. I'm your host, Jesse Bourgeois. Let's get into it. When we think about nutrition research, we often think about studies talking about what foods to consume and what foods to avoid, and in what quantities in regards to our health or performance or goal, be it fat loss or something else. And that's a big part of it. And we're going to talk a lot on this show about nutrition and nutrition science of that type. But I want to share with you something different today. I want to share with you some of the research that goes under the radar and that, combined with the basics of nutrition science, would likely be a much better place for people to dedicate their time and attention compared to the chaos of diet culture. It's this idea of being mindful of your relationship with food and making your own personal nutrition culture, a nutrition culture that's yours and not theirs. And it's built around microhabits, a concept I first heard on Rich Roll's podcast, which he summarizes nicely here whilst being a guest on the Modern Wisdom podcast. Take a listen.
The reinvention occurs in the micro actions that you're taking every single day. The tiny little things that perhaps no one even notices that are creating muscle memory around new behaviors that perhaps are very uncomfortable to you. Like, hey, I'm going to engage with this person in a different way than I usually do by being more direct or more honest, or I'm going to put down a boundary, or I'm going to say no to this and yes to this. Tiny little things repeated over time is what produces dramatic change. And it's like this curve, it's like this very slow curve until it asymptotes up. And everyone wants to talk about the pivot moment when it goes skyward, but The truth is, the real work is in the drudgery.
Correct.
And the difficult, anonymous work of shoveling shit every single day.
So today, let's talk about 3 things and the studies that relate to this idea of developing little daily microhabits that can contribute to and transform your well-being in relation to food over the long term. First, culinary skills, or cooking. This systematic review from 2019 by Hassan and colleagues looked at 30 studies with a total of 7,381 participants consisting of both youth and adults to see what impact culinary or cooking interventions have on diet quality and behavior. What they found was that cooking interventions were associated with improved attitudes, self-efficacy, and a healthier dietary intake in adults and children, and that interventions with additional components such as education on nutrition, gardening, or physical activity may be more effective. And this makes good sense. Cooking and eating at home tends to consist of healthier foods compared to eating out. But it's a skill. If you don't know what you're doing, it's more likely you're going to turn to packaged foods, which tend to be less nutrient dense. And like any skill, when you reach a certain level of proficiency, you start to feel like you belong in the environment that expresses the skill. Your confidence goes up. You start to have some fun with it. It becomes a part of who you are. It improves your well-being. This systematic review from 2017, published in the Journal of Health, Education, and Behavior, found that cooking interventions also improve psychosocial outcomes, including self-esteem, social interaction, as well as decreased anxiety, and improved overall psychological well-being and quality of life. Food is a huge aspect of our lives, and the rituals and culture we develop around food can be powerful, and cooking is a big part of that. And developing your culinary skills is a series of micro-habits, such as turning to whole food-based cookbooks, organizing your time management in such a way that you have time to cook, and being on the same page with those you live with, if you live with others, so that you cook meals that work for everybody, to learning chopping and knife skills, and so on. An interesting thing that comes up often in these studies, and in particular with adolescents, is how when cooking becomes a family activity, it tends to sustain much longer. If you create a vibe out of your cooking experience, make it fun, enjoyable, it can be a really great contributor to your overall well-being. For example, I have a cooking snack. I put out a little bowl with something that I particularly enjoy. Pistachios, candy, tortilla chips, dark chocolate, whatever it might be, with the sole purpose to enhance my cooking experience and make it fun and something I look forward to after a day of work. When I'm making some plant-rich dinner with a little something sweet to eat while I cook, it can be at times one of the best parts of my day. There's no right way or rules, it's whatever works for you. The framework I keep in mind around my own personal nutrition culture, for what it's worth, is well-being for me, meaning it needs to contribute to my overall health and taste good. Well-being for others, meaning it needs to contribute to the health and enjoyment of whomever I'm cooking for, usually my wife and 1-year-old son, and well-being for the planet and all of its inhabitants, which is just part of my value system, so we make plant-based meals. Now, before we move on to number 2, I want to give a little teaser for future episodes, because it's related to this discussion. My son is 1, so food isn't too big of a deal yet, but I hear it gets harder. One thing that's promising is that there is a whole collection of research around dietary interventions with kids and teenagers. And an approach that looks promising is this combination of cooking education and gardening. And soon, we're going to be doing a whole month on this show where the main story of each episode of the month is dedicated to exploring how gardening contributes to well-being. And we'll talk more about this then. But it's a neat approach with kids because it's hands-on and activity-based that you can do together. And the research suggests it works, meaning it leads to confidence, self-efficacy, and healthier dietary outcomes, notably for the youth and the adults. More on that in the future. So we've talked about the first personal nutrition culture variable that can be a great contributor to improved well-being, which is cooking skills. Second is multi-sense meals. Food and nutrition isn't just about the taste and the nutrients the food provides. Those are really important aspects, but so is how it looks, its presentation, how it smells, and how the environment around you smells while you eat, the texture of the food, which can also contribute to the sound of the food, and how these qualities of the food play with one another when you mix ingredients and create a meal. How a meal interacts with your senses can impact your experience and your food choices. And something so interesting about this aspect of nutrition is there are some general things that seem to apply across the board, such as sweet smells tend to be appealing. but it varies a lot culture to culture and at times person to person what will contribute to appetite and enjoyment compared to avoidance of a food, which is actually pretty cool because it means it's about you and your unique preferences and your family and friends and roommates' unique preferences. The research in this area is quite interesting because there's studies like this one by Ford and Graff from 2022 that look at how the sensory properties of food contribute to our perception of food, but also contribute to our behavior with food, saying, quote, sensory properties inform likes and dislikes, but also play an important functional role in guiding food choice and intake behavior. Odors direct food choice and stimulate sensory specific appetites, and taste helps to anticipate calorie and nutrient content of food. Food textures moderate eating rate and the energy consumed to satiation and post-ingestive metabolism. And each of these variables has its own research around it. This study published in the journal Flavor in 2015 talks about food color. Side note, that might just be my favorite academic journal name ever, Flavor. In the paper, the author talks about how color is the single most important product intrinsic sensory cue when it comes to setting people's expectations regarding the likely taste and flavor of food and drink, and how by gaining a better understanding of the sensory and hedonic expectations elicited by food color in different groups of individuals, researchers are coming to understand more about why it is that what we see modulates this multisensory perception of flavor, as well as our appetitive and avoidance-related food behaviors. All of this to say, it's worthwhile, especially if you've been unsatisfied with your current dietary intake and what it's comprised of, to think about how you can make small changes to make the food more appealing to all of the senses. Taking a multi-sense approach to your nutrition, a small habit that can make a difference is food presentation. If a meal was meant to be eaten all together, I used to simply stir it all together in a pot or bowl or whatever I was cooking with. But lately, I've been trying to be more present and mindful about how I present the food for my own benefit, but also for my family. Creating layers and color separations and adding garnishes, little things to enhance the experience. And speaking of mindfulness, this is our third variable that we're talking about today that contributes to our overall nutrition well-being, mindful eating. Mindfulness is challenging to talk about because it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. To someone very familiar with Buddhist tradition and practices, mindfulness will mean one thing, and to a secular Western 20-year-old leaving a yoga studio, it'll likely mean another. And we have the same challenge in the research around mindful eating, where there are various different scales and measurements being used. The mindful eating questionnaire, the mindful eating scale, mindful eating behavior scale, mindful eating inventory, 4-facet mindful eating scale, and then the whole area of intuitive eating, which is similar but slightly different, and with many different approaches being used as interventions as well, including acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and mindfulness-based stress reduction. This review, published in 2022 by Katie Tapper, is really excellent in providing an overview of the scientific landscape on this topic. And depending on what approach is taken, we see varying results, but several meta-analyses have concluded that mindfulness-based interventions may reduce eating disorder symptoms such as binge eating and emotional eating, albeit with limitations. The quality of the studies aren't great. There's also evidence to suggest that it can help with weight loss, but with this type of research, when there's a lack of scientific structure and the evidence is variable, but what it's asking of you as an individual if you were to try it out is likely to be net beneficial or something you can simply stop whenever you feel like it, the way I like to think about it is the research suggests this might work for improved health and nutrition behaviors, but also could improve my overall well-being and experience with food. I'm going to try it out because it seems reasonable and like something that would cause me to have a better day when I do it versus when I don't. And it's not asking me to take on some wild diet or spend a bunch of money or anything like that. Because typically, mindful eating consists of the following, and there are things that you can try out and just see how they do. Before we get into the practices, though, I do like the idea of journaling through this process because it can be hard to notice improvements in the moment, but over time as you reflect, it can become really apparent. Something like an intuitive eating workbook can be really great here. But mindful eating can, for the most part, be described as present moment awareness. It's a slowing down and paying attention to your food, your body, your cues, and your thoughts. For food, it's noticing the textures, the smells, how it looks, the temperature, and so on. The things we talked about already today a little bit. Taking a moment before you eat and while you cook to really experience and be mindful of your food. For your body, it's paying attention to your feelings of hunger, of fullness, and of how certain foods make your body feel. Performing a type of body scan periodically, before, during, and after you eat. Depending how old you are, you might be from a generation where you were encouraged to eat till you're done as a kid. And many of us carry that forward. We use the visual cue of the plate to determine when we're done and not our own hunger and fullness signals. This can make a big difference. I'm here to tell you it's fine to leave food on your plate when your hunger is satisfied. There's this Japanese Confucian concept, harahachibu, which means something like eat until you're 80% full, and that's always stuck with me. I don't always do it, but it's a type of nutrition mantra that has been with me for years now, and you can develop your own that helps you be more mindful, which leads into the present awareness of your body, your cues, and your thoughts. It's recognizing what cues trigger a response to what you eat. Maybe it's the chips on the counter, or for me, the candy in the candy bowl, or things like low mood that lead to the thought of, I just need a sugar boost, and things like that, which is closely tied to the mindfulness practice of acceptance and non-judgment. It's about noticing these things, but taking a non-judgmental stance. You know the scene in Ted Lasso where he talks about be curious, not judgmental? It's doing that with your own thoughts around food. Be your own little Ted Lasso on your shoulder. These three things, cooking skills, paying attention to how food interacts with all of your senses, and taking a mindful approach are all ways we can get away from diet culture and improve our well-being in relation to our food. And I think what I love about it most is it brings us back to real life and real experience and real enjoyment of our bodies and our food and life, and can have absolutely nothing to do with the fictional world of social media and diet culture. That's our main story for this week. And I talked too much, so we don't have time for a secondary story and are going to move right into our Wellbeing Weekly Roundup. Book recommendation of the week instead of a podcast is Garden Spells by Sarah Addison Allen. If you're into cottagecore, magical realism vibes, this book is an absolute gem and has food as a theme throughout it. The way the food fits in with the story made me rethink my own relationship with food. It causes you to think about how food and cooking and the properties of the food can be almost magical and subtly shift and weave into the narrative of your life. And it makes you want to cook yummy, weird things. 10 out of 10, highly enjoyable novel. Next up, I have a particular distaste for folks who try to villainize fruit. This umbrella review from 2021 looked at 77 meta-analyses and found no adverse relationships between fruit intake and health outcomes, that one serving increment of fruit per day could decrease the risks of cardiovascular disease, stroke, coronary heart disease, and oral cancer, that 200-gram increment of fruit per day was associated with lower risk of breast cancer, and the risk of type 2 diabetes could be reduced by 8 to 12% when the fruit intake increases to 100 to 500 grams per day. Which is why this post by Mitchell Little at Mitch Little Academy, I applaud greatly. Take a look.
You believe this? There's more sugar in your banana than in a glazed donut. You are hitting a bit of fiber, but be mindful with your bananas.
Well, that's super damaging, confusing, and misleading, isn't it? Comparing a banana to a glazed donut, making the assumption that a glazed donut is bad for your diet and a banana is good. But now, is a banana good? It's filled with sugar. Maybe I shouldn't eat bananas. This is why people are struggling with weight loss. When we get to the point where we're doubting whether the piece of fruit in our hand is a good option or not, well, this is a dark place. There is no such thing as a good or bad food. There is simply better choices we should all make in terms of our calories if weight loss is your primary focus. And in regards to fruit, hook in. It's nutrient dense, low in calories. I can't believe I'm making this video. Hi, my name's Mitch, reminding all of you to be consistently average and to get some fruit right up ya.
And lastly, since March is Nutrition Month, we're going to be highlighting some of the best resources available to you to help you have a greater understanding and transform your nutrition so that you can better filter misinformation and stick to what truly matters. And I have to start with Alan Aragon. The Alan Aragon's Research Review, the ARR, was my secret sidekick through university and taught me more than all of the university classes I took on nutrition. It was what gave me the light bulb moment of, oh, that's what nuance looks like. That's what critical thinking in regards to nutrition looks like. Between that and his book, Flexible Dieting, which probably isn't what you think it is, He has contributed so much to my approach to nutrition. I'm truly grateful for his work. Even though we have different approaches, me following a vegan dietary pattern and him not, I always found that the articles in the AARR were never judgmental toward a plant-based diet or a vegan diet, but rather just presented the evidence. And that's hard to find, someone that can combine practical expertise and coaching experience with the evidence in an unbiased way. I highly recommend checking out his work. And that's it for this week. If you enjoyed this episode, I would be so grateful if you shared it with a friend or a family member that you think would enjoy it. And please reach out if you have any questions or concerns or just want to say hi. See you next week, where we'll continue our March month of nutrition. Thanks for listening.